Okay.
Let us get started here. Let me jump into the content I am going to share first and foremost. Oh, I left it on this. See, I never do this exactly right. All right, today we are going to be talking about winterization. And we have with us a very special guest and someone I am proud to have on the show as the first Colorado special guest. I am so happy that I finally get somebody from my own backyard to have on the show. Michael Kompinski is a great water manager and an irrigation manager for Brightview here in Parker, Colorado. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Ben, thank you so much for having me, man. What a pleasure.
It is awesome. Mike and I go way back. We've been working together for nearly a decade, I would guess.
Yep.
And I thought he was a great guest to have on for the subject of winterization because here in Colorado, we take winterization very seriously. It's something that you have to do. And I know that it's something that is regionally different. So today we're going to talk about the differences that we see regionally. We're also going to drill into the specifics of winterizing your WeatherTRAK and what goes into that, and lean on Mike for his field expertise. He's winterized a lot of WeatherTRAKs at this point in his career.
Yep.
So let's just jump right into this. So first of all, I already stole the conversation from this first slide, right? That it is winterization season. Mike, when does that officially start for you?
We always try to start, call it second to third week of October. Obviously, a big factor that's going to come into play in that is what the weather's doing. Weather, at least, I think for most of us has been extremely hot and dry. So
except for that snowstorm in the middle of
September. For that quick little brief thing that definitely got people to change their minds. I've already seen compressors out and running.
Absolutely. So in your contracts, do you have a date set? Like in your maintenance contracts, do you tell them it will be done by X?
Yeah, so it's kind of general like that. So normally we're going to have at least a 30 to a 45 day window.
Okay.
So basically it's just a conversation with the clients of, a couple weeks beforehand, hey, this is what we're planning for, and then as it gets closer to it, just nailing down those exact dates.
That's awesome. So as we go through now, winterization means different things to different people. So in Colorado, we're going to talk about the full-on blowouts, right? This is something that in the colder regions, everything probably north of us gets blown out, which means that you actually take all of the water out of the line so it doesn't freeze and damage your irrigation system. I know that many of the listeners out there are in California or Florida or places where either they have year-round irrigation, or as they do in California, they have what they call the cold season or the rainy season, which is cold enough to stop irrigation, but not really cold enough to need to blow out. So they turn stuff off, but don't need to go through the process that we do. And the reason that I highlight that is when we talk about WeatherTRAK winterization, we're going to talk about something that is going to be true of both us and the year-rounders in what we do with the controller, specifically putting that controller in winterized mode. And then we're going to talk about some details of what the folks like Mike and I do and the process of winterization. I just think that my water nerds out there would appreciate kind of the process that we go through and some of the hazards that we see. So we'll jump right into this. First of all, we want to talk about putting your controller in winterized mode. Now, whether you are in Colorado or in a place where you're blowing your systems out, or you're in California and you're just going to shut them down, we want to, instead of turning that system off, we want to turn that system to winterized. And as I show you in this slide, that's something that can be done from WeatherTRAK.net, from the manage page of WeatherTRAK.net. It can be done from WeatherTRAK mobile, and it can be done at the controller itself. So after you shut it down for the season, instead of leaving that controller in off, I want you to leave that controller in winterized. And the reason for that is winterized will suspend the depletion on those stations, right? So we've talked in previous episodes about how WeatherTRAK calculates depletion for every station, or watches that glass of water underneath every station. And when a system is winterized, that's not something that we need to be concerned about. Sure, there is some of that happening, but because we're not irrigating, it's not something that we need to track. And what tends to happen, what tends to end up happening on those systems is if we are not irrigating, in the off position, the controller still is applying depletion to every station. And what that does is start to pop up all sorts of alerts and craziness that's happening, right? So we see station high depletion alerts, we see water window and water day alerts because those stations think they're getting thirstier and thirstier and they want to irrigate. You start to get a bunch of WeatherTRAK alerts that you can't really act on because we're not really irrigating. So the difference between off and winterized is in off, the controller still applies depletion, but in winterized, will suspend that depletion so that it stays where it is. And then next spring, you can just turn that back on and not worry about getting a million alerts in between now and then. Mike has been managing these systems long enough to know, to remember when we had that problem, right? When we were getting all of those alerts. Is that something that you've adopted and you train your guys to do?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not only because of those depletion rates and what happens when you come to activate it and you've left it in off all winter long. Yes, you're going to have some very high run times, but it comes on to my side because if I'm call it the water manager and looking over my entire account, it's a very quick checklist. Then I can run through all my controllers real quick and say, okay, I see what the status is, and I want to see that winterized status.
Nice, yeah. So you can see the difference, like between just turned off and waiting to be blown out and actually blown out.
Yep.
That's a great point, right? And a different way of tracking not just the technology, but your teams as well.
Yep, and it helps with scheduling too then. So, you can sit and kind of real time watch that data and say, okay, my guys are moving quicker than I thought they were. I'm going to go ahead and build stuff for them for tomorrow.
Nice. Beautiful. All right. So other than that, like that is kind of universal WeatherTRAK, right? That is going to happen on every system, whether you're turning it off for the rainy season or blowing it out for the long cold winter. So next we want to talk about the hardware itself and protecting the hardware itself when we are going into the actual process of blowing the system out. So there is really only one thing to consider when you're talking about that, and that is your flow sensor, right? The only difference between managing any other system and managing a WeatherTRAK is with WeatherTRAK, you're likely to have a flow sensor on there. And those flow sensors are not happy about being blown out. In fact, I learned that air pressure will spin the internal mechanism on a flow sensor at 20 times the speed that water pressure does. So inside both your T-style flow sensors and your hydrometers, there's an internal component we call an impeller. And as water flows, it's designed to spin as water flows by it and create a pulse that then the controller picks up and turns into gallons per minute. But when we apply air pressure to it, it spins it like a top. It's like a pinwheel in there. And instead of, it literally spins 20 times faster. So it's crazy. It can actually damage the components because it's moving so fast. It can damage those impellers. If there's any debris in the line, it can nick those impellers and long-term cause wear and tear on your flow sensors and affect the accuracy with which they report. So, as the manufacturer, I have to say, don't ever do that. Don't ever blow air through your flow sensor. It is recommended that you put a blowout port after your flow sensor so that you can plug in and not blow air through that and spin those internal components. However, as a resident of the real world, I know that that's not always a possibility. The process is generally attach the compressor to the backflow right at the very start of the system. And so blowing air through the flow sensor is just kind of a hazard that you have to be ready for. So whether you are blowing through that or not, you want to turn off all of your flow monitoring for the process of winterization. So let's step back a little bit and talk about the process, Mike. When you pull up on a site, what do you do? What is the process of blowing out a system?
All right. Well, I mean, so let's just go through the basics. So number one thing, obviously, shut off and drain the water. So, first goal is before you start pushing air through it, let's try to get as much of the main line emptied as we can. So, if you have the ability, you want to tie in to try to do it at multiple points. So obviously, if you can hit lower elevation sections of your system, open those up. The bigger the orifice that you can create access through, obviously going to make it easier to get the water out. So get the water off. Obviously, so if you're using WeatherTRAK controllers with flow, there's a couple things that you're going to want to do with that. So you want to go into your low flow, high flow, no flow settings. You want to shut off all of that stuff. If you try to keep that stuff running and you're running the controller as you're blowing out, it's just going to trip alerts. And if you're going through a master valve, it's going to shut your master valve down and it's going to stop the process. So obviously, make sure all of that stuff is done correctly.
And I would add to that, not to interrupt, but I would add to that, even if you've done it correctly, then when you go to run those valves, you're going to get no flow alerts. Like if you've isolated it away from the air away from the flow sensor, you're going to avoid the mainline break alerts, but still the controller is going to detect that no flow is happening. So either way, you want to turn that flow sensor off so that you're not creating alerts that interrupt the process. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So, another key factor I see, and this is more on the larger commercial systems, when you're using multiple compressors, definitely make sure the guys are coordinating together. What can end up happening is, say if you have a compressor on one end of the system and another compressor on the other, well, what are you doing? You're just pushing water back and forth, and you're never really getting it all the way out. So make sure that you've got a game plan in mind and follow those strategies. I mean, your ultimate goal is obviously.
And that can create a lot of pressure on that. Like that's when you start to see the fun part of winterization, right?
Oh yeah.
One time when I was winterizing a system, I turned on a station and literally like a bottle rocket, one of my rotor heads flew out of the ground up like 30 feet.
Yep. What
kind of stuff do you see like that?
We run into that every single year. You're guaranteed that you're going to have heads blow, especially, you've missed repairs throughout the season, so you already have something that's weak or loose. Yep, as soon as that compressed air hits it, it is going to blow it. So always tell the guys, hey, don't stand directly over the heads, especially when the zone's coming on and you think it's going to come on, be out of the area. Valve boxes. Valves are another key one. I know everybody runs into it. Valves don't always kick on automatically. You got to go in there and you manually turn them on. We've seen valves blow up, and that's not a pretty thing either. Yeah.
I bet that's
not
dangerous.
When you're directly down to it, right?
Your face is all over the valve. You're cranking on the flow control, and boom.
And boom. Yep.
Oh, no.
And then obviously, the other one. So temperatures are cooler. Critters, where are the critters going to be? Snakes especially, inside the valve boxes.
I would not be happy if I found a, because you're in
Yep.
rattlesnake country, right? Parker is where all of
Yep.
those rattlesnakes are.
Yep, Parker and Castle Rock. We see them all the time. So definitely look, sweep before you start touching stuff.
That good point. Good point. All right, so we've got the compressor attached. We've got the system running. After you run through the entire system, what's next?
So basically, so then you're going to make sure that everything is set up correctly for the winter. So obviously, WeatherTRAK controllers, winterized mode. Definitely, I think that's a good time to go back in there and return on all the stuff that you'd shut off. So lows, highs, no flows. Make sure that's re-engaged, because come activations, if you miss that stuff, you know it's just stuff that you want to make sure is ready to rock and roll again.
Right. And then just leave it all open, right? Just after you disconnect, you leave it open and call it good.
Yep. Leave it open. Make sure everything's good. I mean, as you know, I always say communication, communication, communication. So document everything. Obviously, you know, when it comes, you're going to see stuff that breaks. Are you fixing it then? If not, make sure you have a list of it. It's easier to come back to, and it's easier to have that conversation with somebody that knows that something had happened instead of surprising them with it.
Absolutely. All right. So that was awesome. Thank you for that. Just to give you year-rounders a flavor of what we go through in the cold climates, that is very common. Like I can't tell you. It's fun. Every time you turn on a station, it's like 30 seconds of excitement followed by 5 minutes of standing there watching it blow out.
Yep. Yep.
So my other point on that was, once you have turned it off, make sure to turn it back on, right? Just like Mike said, the most common mistake or misstep that I see is guys winterizing a flow sensor, turn it off, and then halfway through the next summer, they realize I never turned it back on, and they've missed a full half a summer of flow monitoring and leak detection and all of the information that is key to a water manager. So the next thing I did want to do with you is just walk through a big part of what I think is important is making this an efficient process. And so I wanted to just show you guys, last night we came out with an update for WeatherTRAK Mobile. And I want to give you just some tips and tricks on WeatherTRAK Mobile that might save you some steps while you're out in the field and give you something to do while you are standing there watching the air run. So I'm going to just pull up my WeatherTRAK Mobile here for a second. We'll do a quick demo. So I log into WeatherTRAK Mobile. And the first thing I want to highlight is a newer feature, something that I've highlighted on this show before, but this is something that just came online for our OptiFlow users that I think is absolutely critical for our winterization process. So first of all, the update. Notice that as I scroll through, the best way I know how to describe it, we reformatted the view of the page. Previously, we had two buttons, a left button and a right button, and the small button on the left actually took you to what the page did, and the big button that had all of the information on it advanced the screen, and that confused some people. So now you can see, as you select the big button, it takes you right to that application. If you hit the forward button, it advances you to the next screen. So I'll advance from my sites to my controllers by hitting that forward arrow button, right? And this is on the controller screen. The big button shows you what the controller level alerts are, right? The alert management, the pause, the controller mode. This is something that is important for winterization. This is where I can switch that controller from off or from on to off to winterized as the process goes forward. So that is something that you can do on the app very easily. But one thing I wanted to highlight is as you are winterizing, it is very, very easy, a great time to take advantage of some of these new features. So we have done an update to the platform. It looks a little different, but the process is still the same. We select the number of minutes that we want a station to run. And then when I select a station, I hit this start button. One of the things that my contractors complained about was stations changing in their pocket. It was actually too easy to change stations. So we made it a double button push to start irrigation. You select the station that you want, hit start, and that station will begin to run. Now, this is what I want to encourage you to do, because in that first 30 seconds, you watch for heads shooting out of the ground, but then you've got 5 minutes there that you're kind of just watching it. And we have integrated the mapping onto the station programming pages. So now that we've updated the station programming page to look like this, where I can actually start and stop the station from irrigating on this screen. And not only do I see all of the station programming, obviously, but we've also integrated the mapping into this page. And so this little orange button, wait for it. There we go. This little orange button at the top that will place a pin in the site map. And that is placing a pin we call station location, right? So we want to put this pin exactly where that station comes up in the field. So we take it, we drag that and drop it by where those heads are blowing out the air, right? And this will just document both in WeatherTRAK mobile and in WeatherTRAK.net where that station location is. And this is super valuable information for you. And then you can come in here and you want to identify which station that controls. So you go here and choose the station that it manages, and then save that into the process, or save that into the, come on, there we go. Choose the controller, choose the station, and then it will come up for you right on the map, and then your stations will show you, go back to the map or go back to the manual, and the stations will show you which ones have been located on the map. This little map pin shows you which stations have been identified in the program. So definitely want to encourage you to use these mapping features. It's something new to WeatherTRAK mobile, and I think it's a super value, and I also think it's something that you'll have time to do as you are winterizing these stations. So on top of that, just use the WeatherTRAK mobile to do all of your winterization. One thing I want to highlight is the ability to, on your OptiFlow controllers, run multiple stations at the same time or overlap those stations. This is a significant time advantage. Like Mike said, if you have 2 compressors running a big system, you can run more than 1 station at a time. And so on WeatherTRAK mobile, you go to, on your OptiFlow controllers, you go to multiple, and instead of doing what we call stack, which is 1 station after another in sequence, we select this icon, which allows us to do what we call overlap, or run multiple stations all at the same time. So if I wanted to run stations 1, 2, 3, and 4 all at the same time, I select those, I hit next, and I'm off to the races. I can even change the times I wanted to on one station or another. And I can just start all of those stations. And instead of doing one at a time, You can do 4 at a time. You can do as many as 9 at a time per controller if your air pressure allows. So definitely encourage you, if you're managing an OptiFlow system, I think that that could be a real time saving. Let me get back to Mike here. Let me get out of here. Mike, have you used that multi-manual at all yet?
I have not had a chance to do that yet. That is a great tool.
So other systems though, where you try and run multiple stations while you winterize, can you speak to the advantage of doing that?
Yeah, so you know, and the way that I look at it, obviously we're always trying to keep our efficiencies as high as possible. Winterizations are just that. It comes at a time towards the end of the season where you're trying to do it before freezing temps really take place. You want to try to be done before you really do start getting some hard freezes and potentially damaging irrigation systems. So we usually schedule a month to do it. You have a very short time frame, so the quicker you can move through the stuff and do it efficiently, do it correctly, the better off you are.
All right, I love it. And we are approaching time here, Mike. So I'm going to, this is one I did not warn you about.
Okay,
so
surprise.
On the show, I always finish by asking the special guest, what does WeatherTRAK save you?
What does it save me?
What does it save you?
It saves me a whole lot. It saves me trips out to sites when I can figure stuff out remotely. It saves me, well, let's say it makes conversations easier with clients because of the reports that I can pull. I mean, there is a whole different slew of all sorts of reports, and obviously the more components you have with your controllers, the more detailed reports you can get. So it saves time with that. Definitely saves time when you're creating water budget. So if you have sites that will provide you with allocation data, stuff like that, of what they have gallonage wise to use for a whole season, it makes your water budgets that much simpler. It saves techs. I can't tell you how much time out in the field. Instead of, most guys are running by themselves. Instead of running back and forth from controller back to the field, trying to figure out what zones it are, I mean, you have the power in your hand right there.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's awesome. Mike, again, I appreciate you making time for us. I know you're busy, but it was great to have you on the show. Way to represent Colorado in the house.
Absolutely. There you go.
Hope to get more of our Colorado brothers in the house, but thanks for being the first.
No problem.
Thanks to Brightview for a great organizational partnership that has proven successful for both of us. So I'm excited for all the projects we've done together and all the projects we still have on the table.
Yep.
So until next week, everyone, I appreciate you being here, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Ben.